I wanted to throw the book across the room a couple of times while reading. I know this is going to be a very controversial choice, and so many people absolutely love this story, but I just don't. I'm so sorry, I don't. Hi bookish friends, my name is Jackie, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to some 5-star reviews of some of my least favorite books. So I previously did a reaction to 1-star reviews of some of my all-time favorite books, and I've been meaning to do this version of it for a while now. I've really been wanting to react to 1-star reviews of some of my favorite books. This is something that I've been wanting to do for months since I did my previous video, and I'm so excited to be bringing you this version now for Bookmas. The first book that I thought it would be fun to do this with is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This is a classic novel that I had to read for school, so I think that's gonna give you a little bit of why I may not have enjoyed this very much. Some of the books that I had to read for school growing up, I just resented because of the fact that I had to read them and analyze them so closely, I think, especially when I was younger. Nowadays, I don't think that's really the case, but in middle school, this was very much a common thing for me. But Lord of the Flies is a classic 1954 novel about a group of British schoolboys stranded on a deserted island who descend into savagery as they try to govern themselves. It explores a lot of themes of human nature, morality, and the conflict between civilization and chaos. And initially it was very slow selling, but it has become a well-beloved classic. It's known as like a parable or an allegory for the darker side of the human experience and humanity's capacity for violence when the rules of society have kind of disappeared and there is no social hierarchy or structure. I didn't really love this one because I just had a difficult time with reading it. I think just the brutality and savagery depicted in this was a lot for me to stomach, and that's kind of why I couldn't really handle it when I was reading it in middle school. I wonder if this is something that I would change my mind on if I were to read it more today, but back then it just wasn't something that I was in the right headspace for, especially with other things going on in my life, so I didn't end up loving this one. It's one of my least favorite books to date of all time that I've ever read, so that should tell you how I ended up feeling about this. I think I'm more ambivalent about it now, but I do remember strongly disliking it back in the day. Okay, so let's go with the first review. It says 4.5 stars. I was considering giving this book 2 stars at about halfway through. I was bored and more bored, and I just couldn't understand why people like this book so much. So relatable. As I was reading this book, I had a hard time getting into it, and I was really bored by a majority of it, and the other bits that I wasn't bored by personally were just so graphic for me to process and overwhelming, so that led to my dislike of it. And it also says, then I read the second half and whoa, it took me by surprise. I had so many feelings reading this book. Sadness, anger, but also happiness at many points. Yes, I was confused, but it only made me want to read on to know more. I'm glad I read this as it's on the 50 books to read before you die challenge, and also as I really enjoyed the book overall, even though the beginning was a bit difficult to trudge through. I highly recommend trying the classic out if you haven't yet. So I feel like some of my thoughts have kind of been encapsulated in this review. I did find the book to be boring, and while this person ended up liking the latter half of the book, I think that dragged it down for me even more. Honestly, I just don't really understand what they enjoyed about it, but I'm glad they found something meaningful in the story. I think, like I said, it was just too savage and brutal for me, and I was frustrated by the story, and it led me to have a lot of negative emotions. And honestly, when there are a lot of unlikable characters and I feel so many negative emotions within the story, it's more likely than not to end up being one of my least favorite books, depending on how things end up being resolved. There are some cases, however, where unlikable characters have been able to win me over. I just really couldn't be won over by some of the characters in this. It didn't work for me. So I think that's where I differ from this review, honestly. But I understand that they appreciated it. They were quite respectful with this review, so I appreciate all of that. And I agree with some of the sentiments that they expressed. Okay, here's the next review. I've got the conch now, so listen up. That's a reference from the book, so if you haven't read it, it probably won't make any sense to you, but if you have, you will know. In Lord of the Flies, Golding deconstructed civilization, wiping it out and showing us our world in chaos. It's not pretty. Man without governance is apt to slide into savagery. Correct. This is something that I talked about previously that was very, very prevalent within the book. At first, the castaway children on this deserted isle set up rules and leadership, but law and order is overwhelmed when the majority discover there is no immediate consequence if they give in to their wants and desires. In the place of civility, a brutal world is born in which might is right, the weak are stamped out, and the female voice is all but silenced. Golding pounded away at that theme so much so as to rankle some readers who criticized the book's heavy-handed use of cardboard cutout stereotypes to force the author's point across. Yes, I did feel like the characters were very stereotyped, and that was something that rubbed me the wrong way. I know that people loved the overt messaging within this and how clear it was what these characters were meant to represent, but for me, I just couldn't connect with them because it felt like they were all just allegories rather than real fleshed out people, and I think that's one of the big issues that I had with this book. I don't deny it, but in this instance, I'm okay with it because I found the outcome, depressing and disheartening as it is, satisfying as a statement, and the whole enjoyable as a fully contained tale. Surely the characters could have been invested with deeper background, which would have added greatly to the story in detail as well as pages. Both are unessential for the intended purpose served. Golding held the conch, and Lord of the Flies is what he had to say. I get that he got his message across. I will say that I think he was effective at doing that, but I did want some more background on these children, and I wanted to dive more into their psyches, I think. It does frame them in these cardboard cutout stereotype boxes so much, and that made it hard for me to relate to them. I need to see the good and the bad in characters, and usually I need to see them as like morally gray to really connect with them. Those are just my thoughts and experiences though. Okay, let's move on to the next review. Maybe there is a beast. Maybe it's only us. This book doesn't fall under horror category, right? Then why did it scare the living crap out of me? Yes, it also terrified me when I read it. Lord of the Flies is a story about a group of boys who get marooned on one island after their plane crashed. Now, from the first page of this book, I had this uneasy feeling for some reason. And the more I read, the more the feeling grew. I've already heard that this book was not an easy book to read and that there were some pretty disturbing scenes. But still, I did not expect this. And what scared me the most was just how realistic, at least in my opinion, this book was, and how these children are not any different than adults. I'm positive that we would get similar outcomes if a group of adults got marooned on an island, and that is why, unlike The Maze Runner, this book got it right. I'll definitely reread this book in the future many times because I felt like it was one of those books that just needs to be reread to be completely understood. Yeah, I might want to reread this to completely understand all the themes. Maybe that's part of why I didn't love it, because I just didn't fully grasp it at the time that I was reading it. But I did find the characters to be not necessarily super realistic. I think the situation and how they found themselves reacting to them was realistic, but we didn't get a full holistic view of them. And I think adults would probably fare very similarly, which is why this horrified me so much. Okay, now let's move on to the next review. This says, terrifying and masterfully written. As a teenager, I felt virtuous while reading it, also enthralled and scared. I was convinced this book was teaching me important things I needed to know about life. Now I'm not so sure about that. Yet I'm still so grateful to have been introduced, thanks to William Golding, to the banal, most frightening process of groupthink. Yeah, I think groupthink is very much explored within this, and it's kind of horrifying. Again, I think that's why it ranks so low for me. I really enjoyed 1984, which also kind of dives into groupthink and some of these ideals that are discussed within The Lord of the Flies, but I read that when I was a little bit older, and also I connected more with the story. That horrified me too, but in a different way. This one, just like the gruesomeness of it and the gore was a little disturbing for me in a way that I couldn't really handle. Okay, time for the next review. Not once did I know where this was going to end up. It's weird how while reading it, I knew they were just little kids, but as the story progressed, I also kind of forgot about it somehow, while still being aware of it. The realization how young they all are really slapped me in the face in the last few pages. Around the end, this got really difficult to read just because some parts felt so disturbing to me. Yes, this is how I felt the whole way through the book, but especially in the ending, I had nightmares after finishing this one. Like seriously, it haunted me. I am really glad I finally got around to this though. It was well worth my time. Some parts were kind of weirdly written, but I have no idea if that's the fault of the original or just the translation. Yeah, I did have some areas of it where I didn't connect with the writing style as well, and I really resonate with some of the other things that this review said, but I didn't find it to be really worth my time. I don't know, it just haunted me for weeks after reading it. So at the time, I had kind of wished that I hadn't read it. Okay, let's do one more review for Lord of the Flies. This says, a book so metaphoric and with so many layers to dive into that you will read it at least twice. I don't know if I completely agree with this. I don't disagree with it, but I don't know. I would have to reread the book and let you know if this really resonates with me on a second read. I think that is something that I would probably need to do. I don't know that I want to pick up Lord of the Flies though. Like, I want to read other classics more than this one, and because I have such distasteful memories of this, I don't want to really go back and relive this, but I know I probably should just to have a more balanced view of it. All right, now let's move on to another classic that I've read. This is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I also read this for school, so again, a lot of these have a similar theme of me not really loving them because I had to read them as assigned reading. But this is set in 1937, and it's about two migrant ranch workers named George and Lenny who are living through the Great Depression. They dream of owning their own farm, but face tragedy due to Lenny's mental disability and immense strength. The story explores themes of friendship, loneliness, and the American dream, culminating in a heartbreaking decision for George. It was written as a play novelette intended to be easily adapted for the stage and has been adapted into several successful plays and films. Maybe if I'd seen this as a play or a film, the way that it was intended to be enjoyed and experienced, I would have had a greater appreciation for the story. I feel like this is the case for some of William Shakespeare's plays that I had to read for school. Seeing them acted out gave me a different level of connection to the story than just reading it, and I think that might have been the case with Of Mice and Men as well. But I just didn't really connect with this story. I had a hard time connecting to the characters and what was going on. I found myself feeling really bored throughout the whole story, and I know that we're dealing with Lenny's mental health struggles, which is something that I usually enjoy reading about in books, but in this one, I just couldn't feel connected to him, and I didn't really understand what was going on, at least at the time that I read it. Okay, the first review says, this is the most moving work of fiction I've ever read. In every bit of honest writing in the world, there is a base theme. Try to understand men. If you understand each other, you'll be kind to each other. Knowing a man well never leads to hate and nearly always leads to love. This is a quote from Steinbeck in 1938. They said, 5 stars, this is a book that brings me to tears. This world could use a few more Lennys and a lot more Georges. Like I mentioned before, I just really couldn't resonate or connect with the characters in this, which is why I struggled with it so much. But I'm glad that they really connected to both Lenny and George. I think that if you like the characters, you will like this book, and if you resonate with them, it'll make it a much more enjoyable experience. Okay, let's move on to the next review. This says, trouble with mice is you always kill 'em. That's a quote from Lenny in the book. It says, breathtaking prose, touching characters, and a heartbreaking ending. Who said only lengthy novels can make an impact? I think it did make an impact. I don't know if it made the right impact for me, but I know so many other people have learned a lot from Of Mice and Men and have felt deeply connected to the characters. I, like I said, wasn't touched by them in the same way, and the heartbreaking ending didn't land with me in the same way that it probably should have. Those are just some of my thoughts on it, but I know that other people will differ on this. Okay, let's move on to the next one. It says, much like a finely crafted suspense novel, this literary masterpiece keeps the reader on the edge of their seat from beginning to end. And Steinbeck's impeccable storytelling merges friendship, dreams, and tragedy in a way that resonates with readers from all walks of life. The characters of George and Lenny are brought to life with such depth and complexity that one can't help but become emotionally invested in their journey. One that also explores the American dream amidst the harsh backdrop of the Great Depression depression. As a writer trying to create my own gripping narratives, I must tip my hat to Steinbeck for his ability to create a world so vivid and characters so unforgettable. Of Mice and Men is a timeless classic that will continue to captivate readers for generations to come, a testament to the enduring power of great literature. I think great literature does have a lot of power, and I think this book has really stuck with me, so some aspects of what they said in this review resonated with me. I don't know that I felt emotionally invested in each of the characters' journeys within this. I did enjoy the exploration of the American dream within the story, or at least what I remember was being explored within it. Probably revisiting this book would also be beneficial to me, like revisiting Lord of the Flies would be, but I don't know that I'm super inclined to pick this one up again because I didn't love my reading experience with it. There's a few of these classics that I read for school that I would probably benefit from rereading, but I don't really want to at this point, maybe somewhere down the line. Okay, time for the next review. A wonderful bittersweet book captures the feeling, hopelessness, and camaraderie of the era. Not all was good, not all was bad, it just was. I think that does pretty much encapsulate the Great Depression a lot, and it does give you those feelings of hopelessness and trying to connect with other human beings. I think that is something that Steinbeck tries to do within the book. Whether or not he's successful, I think is dependent on which person is reading it and how they process what he wrote. I didn't really personally feel that way when reading this book, but I know that so many people really connected within it. I felt the hopelessness, but not really the camaraderie, or I wasn't into the way the camaraderie was written maybe. I don't know if this is just me showing prejudice here. That's just my personal thoughts though. And again, it's probably something that I should just revisit. Okay, this is the next one, and this is a pretty lengthy one. It says, simple, charming, deep. I devoured it in a day, really. It is totally the book to start off a journey with. Any journey. I read this over a long period of time. I know we had to read it for class, and because we were dissecting it and doing class discussions for it, we read it in little chunks, which maybe added to my distaste for it because we were dissecting and talking about it so much that I felt like I was just living the story at one point. To continue, it says, Steinbeck needs not too many words to perfectly describe a place, stage scenery, or expand on any issue, no matter how complicated. He doesn't spend his paragraphs on endless descriptions to build and develop his characters. He simply delivers. This is something I will say I appreciated, that it wasn't overly lengthy and he didn't use an excess of words when only a few would do. That's something that I really appreciate, concise but effective writing. So I think he did well with that, and that's something that I agree with on this review. Responsibility, love, mercy, dreams, and expectations are painfully blatant themes, disguised into a story about two men in the American South who arrive at a farm to work and make ends meet. They carry more than the lonely workers usually do, a shared dream and a dark story. Their search is not of the Californian gold or the riches of the North. They just desire a life they can call their own. Yeah, I think that this is pretty grounded in reality. Maybe because it's set in the South, working on a farm. I don't know if that kind of setting threw me off when I read it at the time. I would probably have a different kind of outlook on that and be more receptive to it upon a reread, but I remember being just terribly bored by it, and the setting wasn't appealing to me or interesting when I first read it. Steinbeck never failed to deliver the mentality of his time, a time of uncertainty, cruelty, and imprisonment in social norms, equally for the usual outsiders of societies, people of the lower class, people of color, and women. Too little tolerance for the different, too little life for the abandoned. Yeah, I think this is true for the Great Depression era, especially when everyone was just struggling to make ends meet and to find a way to survive. The people that were on the outside were getting really left behind in a way that hadn't necessarily been seen in the previous couple of decades. It was more egregious at this time, I think, which I would agree to be true with. Yeah, I think it's pretty rough. The ending is so hard, and this feeling of not belonging is something that is deeply unsettling for me, maybe because I really felt this way a lot when I was reading it at the time. So I think maybe it just struck too close to home for me, and some of the themes just didn't work for me because of that. Okay, time for the next one. This says, the saddest and most profound short story I've ever read and will probably ever read in this life. A tale about friendship, loyalty, and doing what's right even in the toughest of circumstances. The plot is stellar in its simplicity. It makes you wonder about the right and wrong of things and the vastly gray area that lies in between. Heartbreakingly beautiful. I think it's not necessarily the most profound thing I've ever read. I've read other things that have moved me more deeply than this, And I do think it does question the right and wrong of things and the gray and morally gray spaces. So that I would agree with on this. I don't know if I had the full appreciation of the breadth of this that it undertook when I first read this. I just wasn't really engaged with the story, so when I'm not really engaged, it's hard for me to pick up on some of these deeper themes and topics, especially when I was a younger reader and hadn't read so many different things. Okay, so this is the last review for Of Mice and Men. 4.5 stars. This book tore me apart into a billion pieces, and I will never be whole again. I think I remember feeling more that way with Lord of the Flies and some of the other books that I've read, that they really tore me apart. This one, I was just like left feeling neutral. I don't know, not neutral, just like a feeling of emptiness, an uninterest, and maybe lack of understanding at the end of it. I was just ready to move on from it, which is really different from this person's experience, but I really respect that they had their own process with this book. Next, I want to mention the Mary Poppins book. I have seen the Disney adaptation quite a few times, so I wanted to pick up the Mary Poppins book a few years ago, and I ended up reading it during the pandemic time when I was getting back into reading. It follows the magical, strict, yet whimsical nanny who arrives on the Banks' London home via the east wind and transforms the lives of Jane, Michael, John, and Barbara with fantastical adventures like sealing tea parties, talking animals, and trips to the North Pole, all while maintaining her no-nonsense attitude and mysterious origins, eventually leaving with the west wind as mysteriously as she came, with each chapter often a standalone magical episode rather than a linear plot. Yes, this was one of the things I didn't love about it. It isn't a linear plot, which can make it harder for me to connect with the story. It just felt like all these things were just unrelated episodes, which I guess is kind of present in the Disney version, but not so much as in this book version. I don't know, I didn't love this book when I read it. I read it around the pandemic time when I was trying to figure out what kind of books I wanted to read, and I read this first book and then decided I did not want to pick up the rest of the series, so this is the only one in the series that I've actually read. Okay, the first review says, one of the great horror novels. I particularly enjoyed the part where Mary gives herself an occult-themed birthday party beneath the full moon with the zoo's entire snake population in attendance. Oh yeah, and the Lord Snake turns out to be her first cousin once removed. That kind of describes to you like just the oddity and ridiculousness of the story, and it being described as like a horror novel, which I didn't really, like about it. It felt very different in energy to the Disney movie that was made of it. I had heard that it was pretty different, and then reading it, I just liked the movie version better. Maybe because that was my first exposure with the story of Mary Poppins, but I just found her to be incredibly unlikable. I don't know if just the British humor of it didn't fully resonate with me, but those were some of my thoughts. Okay, here's the next review. It says, although I grew up watching and loving the Disney film adaptation of Mary Poppins, I wish I read this book as a child. Mary Poppins will have none of your nonsense, especially when she has polite conversations with talking bears, floating uncles, and daughters of the sky. And that is why I love the original characters so much. Sure, she is haughty and to some unlikable, but I finished the book feeling completely charmed and intrigued. I was not charmed, and I wasn't super interested in what was happening in the book. I did find her to be quite unlikable, and I just couldn't connect with her character. I think this was portrayed differently from how it is in the Disney movies. Sure, she's like eccentric in the Disney movie and does some odd things, but I still found her to be more likable there. Again, some of the humor of this maybe was just too dry for me, and that's why I may not have liked it, but I didn't really enjoy any part of the story. I didn't find it necessarily charming or intriguing. I don't know, this just doesn't really resonate with me, but I'm glad that this person enjoyed reading it. Okay, here's the next review. Charming. I loved it. Only a few chapters were similar to the Disney movie, which has always been one of my favorites. I found that I also loved the book, and I'm wondering why it took me so long to finally read it. In chapter 4, it made me laugh out loud several times, and I found a smile on my face and snickered many times throughout reading the rest of the book. Any book that can do that to me these days deserves 5 stars from me. I'm excited to read the rest of the series. I don't think I laughed that much while reading this, and I did expect it to be more humorous. Again, I think I just didn't connect with the wit and humor of the story. I'm glad that this person was able to, but I don't know. I didn't find it to be funny. I found it to be boring in some stretches too. Again, I think the dryness of the wit was what added to the sense of like just feeling prolonged and not enjoying it. But I do know some people really found it to be humorous and entertaining. Okay, here's the next review. I love this book. I still can't believe that I never read it growing up. I am a little bit surprised that I'm reading negative reactions to the original Mary Poppins as vain and unfriendly because there are definitely big hints of that aspect of her personality within the film. I don't know. I didn't necessarily see it that way in the film. Maybe that's just me misinterpreting things from the film, or maybe because I was so young when I watched the movie for the first time that I just viewed her eccentricities as part of her character and as fun and light, which I didn't view it the same way within the book. If I had read this when I was younger, maybe as a child, I might have connected with the story more, but I didn't really feel that way about it. It says, if I'd read the book as an adult, pre-children, I would have had a different reaction than I do now to young children. Yes, see, this is what I'm saying. I think if you're reading this as a child or with children in your life, you might appreciate it more, but for me, it didn't really hit like that. Or when I had less exposure to offbeat British humor. I can empathize a lot with Mary Poppins and her stern reactions to the kids when they have countless earnest but silly questions. It felt very much in the vein of Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, which I loved as a kid. The Banks children are also so genuine, and Travers writes their voice so well. She does a great job of getting into a child's mind. The blur between make-believe and real threw me off a couple of times. I'm excited to read the rest of the series to my daughter and see if she loves them as much as I like the movies. I don't know how I felt about this idea where it blurred these lines of make-believe and reality. I think that's one of the things that made me not love this and threw me off about the story. So many people love the whimsical aspects of this, and I think I usually like whimsical writing, but in this, it didn't really work for me. I just wasn't into this, but I think that reading it with a child or reading it as a child probably changes the experience overall. Okay, here's the next review. When I first wanted to read this book, I was expecting something along the lines of the movie, but how wrong could I have been? Correct. I kind of went into this expecting something a little different since I had read some reviews and heard some things that it wasn't the same as the movie. But for anyone who doesn't go into this knowing that, they're going to be in for a pretty rude awakening because it's so drastically different. Mary Poppins is in no way the sweet person she appears to be in the movie. Not at all. An inhuman, strict, and possibly extremely rude witch is more like it. Yet I loved every single word of this thin novel. It's simply exactly what the doctor ordered. If you want a quick, fun, and sometimes maybe a little shocking read, this is one you should grab. Again, I don't know if I would say this is necessarily super fun. It wasn't for me. It was a pretty fast read. I think I read it in just a couple of sittings. So there is that. If you're interested in trying it out, you could pick it up and read it pretty quickly. But yes, I agree that Mary Poppins here is depicted very differently from how she appears within the movies. She's just like night and day between the movie and the book, honestly. Okay, this is the next review. There are no words. This is the classic and best children's fantasy series of all time. That is debatable. I don't know that I would classify this as the best children's fantasy series, but I know that can be subjective. It's sweet, nostalgic, poignant, and just a little chilling all at the same time. Over the years since childhood, I've read this about 5 times. Wow, this person really loves this book. I'll never get tired of the magical and acerbic governess at number 17 Cherry Tree Lane. Yeah, I did get tired of her on one read, so I don't think that I will be continuing with the series at any point. I don't have any plans of rereading this book, and I know that it's a well-beloved children's series, so make of that what you will. You might enjoy this. I just really didn't like it myself personally. Okay, here's the last review for Mary Poppins. What a bloody delight. Was pleasantly surprised by how very against anything silly Mary Poppins is. Absolutely loved the little adventures she went on. I feel like this kind of contradicts itself because it says that they're pleasantly surprised that Mary Poppins wasn't really into anything silly, but then she went on these fun little adventures, which I think was kind of the case in the book, but throughout the adventures, it seemed like she resented a lot of the things that were happening. At least that's how I perceived it. Honestly, I don't know how to feel about her as a character now. I love the movie version of her, but the book version I just couldn't get behind, and I just didn't like it. But I can appreciate that this person really liked both sides of that same token, and the fact that she was very no-nonsense, but still went on fun adventures. Okay, the next book that I want to talk about is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I know this is going to be a very controversial choice, and so many people absolutely love this story, but I just don't. I'm so sorry, I don't. It follows a young girl named Alice who falls down a rabbit hole, and she goes into the bizarre and nonsensical world filled with talking animals and illogical events. She constantly changes size and encounters strange characters like the Cheshire Cat, Mad Hatter, and the tyrannical Queen of Hearts, ultimately waking up to find it was all a dream, but a journey that subtly satirizes Victorian society and explores themes of identity and growing up. I know that many people are really familiar with this story, and so many people love it. I love the film adaptation of it, but I didn't love the book. I felt like the whole time I was reading it, I was in a fever dream and I couldn't wake up from it, and that was my experience. I didn't particularly enjoy that, but I know so many people love the fun, whimsical aspects of this, and they love the unpredictability of the plot and story. Okay, here's the first review. It says, "What a lot of crazy and fun nonsense." I agree there's a lot of nonsense. It is very crazy. I don't know how fun I found it to be. I'm not sure why I never read this classic earlier, but I've enjoyed it thoroughly every time I've read it in the last few years. I've even reread it aloud to my children a couple of times, and they've really enjoyed it too. My favorite scenes were the court scene, the Mock Turtle's story of the school he attended under the sea, and any scene with the Mad Hatter. Yeah, I don't really remember all the plot details of it that much. I remember briefly meeting with the Mad Hatter, the Cheshire Cat, and the Red Queen, all of those things, but I don't remember the specific instances. Maybe because I was just confused by what was going on and wasn't feeling super connected to the story. I don't tend to remember the plot of books very well either, and then when I don't enjoy them, it's hard for me to retain information, especially years later, but I just didn't really connect with it. I'm glad this person enjoyed the whimsy of it, but it just wasn't for me. Okay, this is the next one. This book was very odd. Agreed, but I loved it. It was also very funny because of all the weird and strange things that happened throughout her adventure, and there was a plethora of them. I love the Mock Turtle. I didn't get the joke till I googled Mock Turtle soup though, but it was funny when I got the joke. And I love the Mock Turtle soup song. It was funny. I don't remember that very much, and I didn't really understand the joke. I do remember there were a few jokes and some references that I completely didn't get or flew over my head. This was probably one of them. I also found it funny how casually the Queen of Hearts would sentence people to death. She would say, "Off with their head!" And the croquet game was so strange and funny, but very obtruse because no one explained the rules to Alice. It was also funny how whenever Alice would ask a normal question, the creatures or people would act like she was stupid. Also, pretty much everyone in the book was irascible, but that made it even more funny. I agree they were pretty irascible, but I don't think it made it more humorous for me. And I don't know, the off with their head, the queen stuff was a little much for me. It was a little dramatic. It definitely felt, like I said, a fever dream, like things were just disjointed within the story, which I think detracted from any possible enjoyment I would have had with the story. But again, I know it's such a well-beloved book. Okay, the next review just says, "This novel is a genuine masterpiece, and I'm not even exaggerating." I really respect this person for standing behind their love of the book and really appreciating it. That's not how I felt, but I'm glad that they stood behind their opinion. Okay, here's the next review. "The sheer bizarreness of it, the nonsensical and silly conversations, the dreamlike atmosphere were what makes this book such a beloved classic." See, those were the things that I struggled with it. Countless adaptations have been made, hundreds of songs have been sung, and there's no denying that Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is a phenomenon to this very day. I agree it has had a major cultural impact and still has affected broad stream media even today, and I can appreciate the story for those aspects. In fact, I was very much obsessed with it when I was younger. Although, for some reason, I can't think if, other than laziness, I've never actually read the story until now, and I absolutely adored it. It was just as lighthearted and strange and funny as I'd always imagined it to be. Again, super glad this person enjoyed it. I can't deny that it has had a major impact on the culture around us, and I have enjoyed some adaptations that have been made of it. There is a play that was kind of made based off of this, and there are movie adaptations, which I really enjoyed. And I really enjoyed a Broadway production of it called Alice by Heart. So I have some versions of the story, but I think maybe as a book, it wasn't the right medium for me, and that's why I didn't feel so connected to it. But I appreciate that this person really enjoyed it. Okay, this is the next one. It says, "I adored every single page of this masterpiece, so much so that I can't quite believe that I hadn't read it before. Of course, I know the story of Alice in Wonderland, as most people do, but reading it was far different than watching the movie adaptations. Lewis Carroll's writing is simply beautiful." I had a hard time following his writing, but I'm glad this person appreciated it. Their narrative flows right off the page so seamlessly that not even my dyslexia could get in the way. As it is written for children, the language and writing style is simplistic. I think the writing style is very accessible. The problem is I felt like the plot was disjointed, so there were different scenes that were meshed together, and it didn't really make sense what was happening in that kind of way. But not in a way that dumbs it down. It reads similarly to poetry, and at times I found myself reading in a sort of rhythmic way, like the way you might read or sing a nursery rhyme. Yeah, I think it could kind of be seen almost like a nursery rhyme in a sense, with how lyrical the writing was. I do agree with that. I really love the ambiguity of the book of not really knowing whether it was a dream or not. And if it was a dream, does that really mean it wasn't real? I think that's interesting to explore those concepts. I'd love to read about that more in another book, but I don't know that I liked how it played out here. I think I appreciated not knowing whether this was really a dream or if it was happening, but I think it brings to mind another concept of reality and our subconscious versus what is truly happening, and whether our subconscious classifies as being true and real. So I think that is a lot to be discussed and unpacked and could be done further within another book. The weirdness of the story is just what makes it so unique. Half the time I felt just as confused as Alice, me too, but I never once got frustrated by the perplexing things that characters said and the puzzling things that happened to Alice. If anything, it just made me curiouser and curiouser. See, this is where this person and I differ. I did get really frustrated with some of this stuff and not understanding. I think I need to work on this concept of just accepting things as they are and accepting that you won't understand everything. But I don't know, in just this narrative, I wanted to understand a little more to connect with it. And without that understanding, it made it hard for me to enjoy it. Okay, the next review just says, just brilliant, and probably the most quotable book I've ever read. I think it's pretty quotable. Probably I've heard so many of these quotes everywhere, and then I forget that they're from Alice in Wonderland. So agree that it's very quotable. Okay, here's the next review. I knew going into this that it would be one of those books that just really clicked with me. I wasn't an especially big fan of any of the movies. See, this is where we differ. I like the movies a lot, but not so much the book or other material that has come in the past few decades. But conceptually, I knew it would click. Beautifully written, whimsical, and creative, all the things I love most. Well worth the short amount of time it takes to consume, especially in this day and age that seems to be so filled with misery and concern. Well, that is a lot to unpack in this review. They really dug deep with this, and the reflections of the present day just being filled with misery and concern, that is something else that's super loaded that I'm not going to even go into now. But yeah, I think it was whimsical and it is creative. I don't know how beautifully written I found it to be. I think a lot of people love the lyrical writing style, and sometimes lyrical writing style just throws me out of a book. Maybe that also happened here. But yeah, I think this really clicks with some people. I think people that really enjoy the book don't necessarily enjoy the adaptations, and the reverse is often true. I don't think this is always the case, but this happens in a lot of circumstances. Okay, here's the last review. I've never read anything quite like this before. While most people have seen the movie, it only covers parts of the story, as there's 4 books in total. Yeah, that's another thing. I didn't feel inclined to continue, but I know there is more of the story and there is more exploration to be had. To be honest, I'm not sure I can clearly define the plot. Me too, but maybe that's because there just isn't one. See, having a lack of a plot or structure in that way kind of made me struggle with this. I know there is deeper messages being discussed in here, and it's more about the whimsy and fun of the adventures rather than being a structured story, but I tend to do better with stories that are a little more structured. At least that's what I've seen with other books that I've read. It seems like the book was created without much concern for structure or purpose, as it was originally invented by a man for his boss's daughters. Yeah, I could definitely see that in here. The novel is full of surprises, especially if you can set the movie aside, with wild adventures, beheadings, and tea parties. Alice is a clever child, clearly well educated, and has an impressive amount of knowledge for her age. That's something that I do like about both the book and the movie. It does depict Alice as being incredibly clever, and I think that it is full of a lot of surprises. I just think one of the things that held me back was I couldn't let go of this image of the movie in my mind, and that's kind of more of what I wanted the book to fall in line with. I especially loved certain phrases like this one. "But I don't want to go among mad people," Alice remarked. "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here. I'm mad, you're mad." The lines about lessons that became lessonings with time are also fantastic. Despite the overall absurdity of the book, there's a strange logic in its madness that I found to be quite rational. I I don't know that I saw all the logic in certain things, but again, I'm glad this person got some more appreciation out of the story. This is something that I enjoy about reading these reviews, especially with these books that I didn't really love, because it's kind of challenging my perspective on these. I don't know that I fully agree with all the stuff that I've been reading, but I think my mind has been changed on certain aspects of some of these books. Okay, the last book that I wanted to read some reviews from is Wahala by Nikki May. This is about 3 Anglo-Nigerian best friends in London named Ronke, Simi, and Boo, whose close-knit lives are upended by the arrival of Isabel, a glamorous but manipulative old friend who exposes their insecurities, secrets, and cultural clashes. This leads to betrayal, drama, and shocking crime that forces them to confront their past and present. It's sharp, witty, and it has explorations of race, identity, female friendship, and the complexities of modern womanhood. At least that's what the description says. So I was really disappointed by this one. I really wanted to love Wahala, and then I just ended up not loving it, which was a great disappointment for me. I had this book on my shelves for such a long time, and then I finally read it earlier this year to just find it to be lacking. I didn't really love the relationship these 3 friends had with each other. I think even before this new friend arrives on the scene, they were already having problems that were going to culminate at some point within the story. And I think that Isabel was a catalyst for a lot of things that would have eventually happened anyway. Maybe not to the same scale, but it just was a problem. I didn't really like any of the characters. Simi, Boo, Isabel, all of them were unlikable to me, and unlikable in a way where I couldn't really connect with them, which made the story drag out. There are so many things I didn't like about this book. I just couldn't connect with some of the ways that race was depicted in here and body issues were talked about. I wasn't really a fan of. So yeah, I just struggled with a lot of things about this book. But I'm hopeful to see some other perspectives on this and maybe see if some of these things will challenge my mindset. Okay, this is the first review. It says, I love this story, I devoured it. I'm a fan of novels featuring toxic friendship and female group dynamic. This was absolutely addictive and beautifully written. I don't love seeing toxic friendships so much. I prefer more functional friendships. I mean, I think toxic friendships can lead to a lot of drama, which can be interesting, but this just felt like the drama was unnecessary, and I didn't love how it played out in this book. A group of close friends, all Nigerian British heritage, rely on each other in their varied lives, but when an outlier arrives, a cuckoo in the nest, so to speak, everything spectacularly falls apart. The writing is vivid and gorgeous, the characters so alive on the page and hugely engaging. I didn't find them to be that engaging. Like I said, I think they were super unlikable. I think that's what the author was going for, but I had a hard time finding redeeming qualities for any of them except for maybe Ronke. As the insidious manipulation begins, heading toward tragedy, it is completely and utterly gripping. The cultural aspects are fantastic, and I'm definitely going to try out all the recipes. That plus the absolutely superb storytelling makes this a must-read in my humble opinion. Highly recommended. I don't know how I feel about the cultural aspects. I can't really make a judgment on that since that's not a culture that I'm very familiar with, but some of the things I didn't love in terms of the discussions of womanhood and race. I think the recipes were fun and the cooking stuff was interesting. I think I would have enjoyed this story so much more if the main characters had been a little more likable, or if, I don't know, things had just played out differently with the twist at the end. I think the book also had some pacing issues as well, where it felt like a large stretch of the story there wasn't a lot of stuff happening, just some slow building up, and then the climax and falling action happens very quickly at the end, which again just didn't work for me. Okay, here's the next review. It says, this was a thoroughly enjoyable and at many times frustrating in an invested way page turner for me. I stayed up way too late to finish it. The ending outraged me even if it was the proper crescendo to close the story. But can we get a sequel or a full-blown series from these ladies so we can heal all that too? One can only wish. I think this review kind of ties into the idea of what I said, where I felt the ending was really rushed. I think the ending was kind of leading to this place from a while earlier in the story, and I kind of saw it coming. This is not something that I really like in thrillers and things that kind of blend the genres, which is another thing. I didn't love how it tried to blend literary fiction and thriller in here. It just didn't work for me. The blending didn't work well. Hopefully this is something that I could see happen more successfully in another book, but it felt like it didn't really know if it wanted to be literary fiction or thriller, and it had conflicting identities in that sense. And yeah, I agree that I think more development and space was needed after the climax and falling action, but I don't know that I would want to read another story in this series. Here's the next one. This book is a real gem and so well written it's hard to believe it's a debut novel. I would describe it as a cross between Sex and the City and Big Little Lies. I haven't seen either of these TV shows, so I don't really understand the reference, but I'm glad that they enjoyed it. I do know a little bit of the premise of Sex and the City, but I just haven't fully watched it. I don't know that I would agree with that aspect of it, but I respect that they have their own thoughts. I love both of those shows. Each chapter is told from the perspective of Ronke, Simi, or Boo. I love all three of these women. They are so strong and vivid that I feel like they were old friends. I enjoyed how the dynamic changes when Isabel comes on the scene. She was very frustrating for me. I had a hard time connecting with her character and really even understanding any of her motivations. So I didn't love when she started to cause the chaos. I wanted to throw the book across the room a couple of times while reading. So if that doesn't tell you how I was feeling, I don't know what does. The pace of the book was perfect. It didn't drag at any point, and I just wanted to read and read to find out what was going to happen. I didn't find the pacing to be that great, personally. I wanted to keep reading to know what the ending was going to be, but I think a lot of areas just kind of dragged out. The ending didn't disappoint and felt very satisfying. I'm glad it just wasn't rushed as happens in some thrillers. See, I disagree with this. One of the other things I enjoyed was learning a little about Nigerian culture, especially the food. I did enjoy learning a little bit about Nigerian culture and the food. I think that was one of the redeeming qualities of this book for me and one of the areas that I really enjoyed. Okay, here's the next review. Wow, I don't even know where to start. This book had my head spinning, but in a good way. What starts off as an easy read about a friendship between a trio of half Nigerian women in London is spun right off its axis as relationships change and develop, all because of the introduction of a fourth character. This book was written in rotation from the perspectives of these three friends and keeps you reevaluating your views and opinions of all three of these. Yes, I did kind of reevaluate my opinions on all of them throughout. At some points, I did feel some level of sympathy for Simi and Boo, and for Ronke, definitely, but I just didn't feel that enough to really connect with their characters, and I could kind of understand their motivations, but that didn't mean that I supported it in that sense. This makes for an interesting case of not judging someone by outward appearances. This story shows so much of our inner lives, the things we hide, even from those we're close to, and the motivations behind why we do what we do or don't do. To top this off, it's a very interesting experiment in human behavior. There's a twist ending that will knock your socks off. The twist ending was pretty epic. It was very dramatic. I think it was a lot for me, but I will agree that this is an interesting experiment in human behavior. I don't necessarily love this one. I think I've loved things like Recitative by Toni Morrison more, which is also another experiment of human behavior. And this one just didn't really work for me because of some of the things I mentioned before. Okay, here's the next review. I really enjoyed the twists and turns of this book. The story is completely unpredictable and fun to read. It also was refreshing to see the men portrayed as good husbands. I did like the men being portrayed as good husbands. For the most part, that was nice. I really appreciated that they were depicted in such a positive light, so I liked that about it. And it was very unpredictable. I don't know how much of a fun read it was, but I agree with a lot of aspects of this review, I'd say. Okay, here's the next review. This was fun. It's going to divide opinions, but it does exactly what it intends. I agree with that. This is a character-focused novel, a British Nigerian women's fiction. Yes, this is true. I know this is a crap term, but it is what it is. It's slightly literary with very minor elements of a thriller. A good one for when you want something a little lighter but still hits some complex notes. The enjoyment definitely outweighs its literary merit. Don't we want to enjoy everything we read? Yeah, we do want to enjoy everything we read, but I don't agree that I really enjoyed this all that much. It does have some literary elements and some thriller elements, and I already talked about how I felt like they didn't really mesh well together, but yeah, I did appreciate some aspects of the story. I do think it did divide a lot of opinions. This is the kind of book that I think is a very polarizing read. Okay, and here's the last review. It says, what a privilege it is to read how these three women navigate through the chaos in their lives, especially through their own perspective. I don't know how much of a privilege I found it to be, but I did enjoy learning more about Nigerian culture. I think learning more about Nigerian culture and some of aspects of Ronke's characters are what saved this book for me from being a complete disaster. Those were my favorite aspects of the book, but generally I didn't really enjoy this. I wouldn't really recommend it unless you think this might be something you might be into. Again, you're free to have your own thoughts and opinions, but this is not one that worked for me, and I had a lot of places where I struggled with it. Alright, so those are all the reviews that I'm going to be reading for this video. I hope you've learned something from this, but most of all, I hope you've just enjoyed getting some of my reactions. I probably made a lot of funny faces in this, and yeah, I was trying to hold back a little bit, but you could tell when I wasn't really agreeing with something that was in one of the reviews. I always think these videos are so much fun to make. I had a great time doing this, and I hope that you've enjoyed. If you like it, make sure to give it a like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate you all so much, and wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I hope that you're doing well, and I'll see you for another video soon. Bye!